Okay, over the past year, I guess, we've been working off and on the series on the Ten Commandments. As we've covered so far the first 4 commandments, and we understand that they show us how to love and honor God as He defines love. Not as the world defines love. God is the one who defines love. He is love. First 4 commandments describe how we are to love and to honor God. And we understand, I think, that the 10 commandments are summed up in Matthew 22, or Christ Himself, the direct author of the 10 commandments, summed up the commandments in Matthew 22. Beginning in verse 35, then one of them, a lawyer, asked Him a question, testing Him, and saying, Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law? And, he was not looking for a new commandment. He was asking, Teacher, and this is one of those questions, this is close to it's not a rhetorical question. It's one of those questions where you already know the answer. And he was asking Him to expound that. Now, of course, understand the Pharisees, Sadducees, they were continually trying to trip Jesus up. They were not, with a few exceptions, interested in learning from Christ. What they did was throw Him various curveballs, looking for an opportunity to trip Him up. But this was a fairly straightforward question. In effect, He was challenging Christ to answer as a Jew would answer in those days. Identify, and if Christ answered completely differently from the way a rabbi would have, He would have identified Himself as a heretic. So this was an attempted curveball. Jesus said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your life, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. That's what we covered it, and the Jews understood this too. The first 4 commandments describe how to love God. The last 6 describe how we are to relate with our fellow man in love. And the second is like to it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Do we understand that the 10 commandments themselves are a summary? The 10 commandments are an attempt to put into 10 operative principles the character of God. Now they can be summarized again, as Christ just did, into 2 commandments. Love God, love your fellow man. So that's what Christ meant when He says, on these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets, because those are all expounding the principles of the 10 commandments. Brethren, sometimes we use analogies that we assume everybody understands. And, this is... I've had I was on a very long, extended visiting trip to Arizona this past week. Just got back, was it late Wednesday night? It was really a wonderful experience. God is calling new people into the church, and these are some people who attend other groups and have this nagging feeling that things are close but not quite right. And they end up with us. And believe me, these people are bouncing off the walls because they know that they found a pearl of great price. Brethren, I think sometimes we don't take our wonderful calling in the high reverence we should of what a wonderful thing we've been given. These people have gone to other groups and seen close but not quite. And they can't even, in many cases, quantify it. I've seen this time and time again. And brethren, it's funny. I didn't do that. You didn't do that. That's the direct hand of God through the Holy Spirit, leading somebody. And some of these people have been through multiple groups. So it's a very inspiring thing to go through. I think sometimes we take certain things, or we mention something in passing. And, one of the hardest things, if you've ever tried to teach somebody something, especially something technical, like the Windows working environment, for instance. My wife doesn't relate with that technology. Things that are obvious to me are not obvious to her, and there are times when I have difficulty going back far enough to start at a basic enough level that I can explain something to. And you'll find in teaching that's quite often the case, especially in teaching something technical. Brethren, we often, we grew up in this society. This is all we know. How many of us have heard the analogy of the frog in boiling water? A frog is a cold-blooded animal. That means that if you put it in a pot of water and then start heating that water gradually, it will not notice the difference until it boils to death. We are the frog, and the society is the boiling pot. We have gotten used to the Sodom and Gomorrah that we live in, the moral corruption we live in. And yes, we're God's people and we're trying to come out of it, but I don't think we react with any near the degree of revulsion and abhorrence that we should. This society is unraveling on almost every level. I talk to church members all the time who are having difficulty making a living. How many church members just say, man, I want to go into my own business because then I don't have to work for a boss who lies to me and wants me to lie as a part of my job. This society is unraveling morally, educationally, socially, governmentally, economically. And do you know that almost all of those have started through an attack on the family? Satan knows what is the basic building block of any society. It is not the individual. We are in a society that worships individualism. The individual is not the basic building block of society. Whether we're talking about a family society, a church society, or a governmental society. It's far worse than most of us realize how effectively Satan has done this. And why has he concentrated so much on destroying the family? Because he knows the fundamental importance of the family. Almost none of us have escaped this influence. Our families are not what they should be, even though most of us, I'm sure all of us, have tried our best to do it right. And I think we understand it probably better now than we did 20 or 30 years ago, but the society we're being influenced by is 100 times worse than it was 20 or 30 years ago, so I'm not sure there's a net gain involved. Let's turn to Exodus 20. Exodus 20. Verse 12. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Kind of like when we were going through the fruits of the Holy Spirit, there's a whole lot more being said in that verse than we've ever realized. For one, remember the days when we would over-dominate women in the church? The approach to authority in the family was the woman had to submit, and that's what we talked about all the time. We were unbalanced, brethren. Yes, the woman has to submit, and it's a major problem for women in the church today to understand that concept. But gentlemen, you and I have to rule like Jesus Christ. And that's where our focus should be. There's an essential equality here. You notice it doesn't say honor your father. It says honor your father and your mother. Both are leaders in the family. But there's a structure. Now, why do you think God gave this command immediately following the first four commands that dealt with loving God? Do you think that was just a random thing? Luck of the draw? No, brethren, it wasn't. He gave this command next because this is the single most important command or principle for dealing with our fellow man, for loving our fellow man, because it all starts in the family. Right after learning how to love and honor God, next in importance is learning to properly honor our father and our mother. Now, I think it's a natural reaction to say, well, why is that so important? Why is that so fundamental? Why does all of the business of loving our fellow man start with honoring our father and our mother? We're going to answer that question today. It's interesting how the Bible continues to, how a lot of times things like this aren't said in one place. Turn over to Leviticus 19. So obviously the Ten Commandments are repeated in Deuteronomy 5, is it? Although Exodus 20 is where most of us are familiar with. Notice how God puts it this time in Leviticus 19, verse 3. Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. That's interesting. In the context of one scripture, he says, if you accept me as the Lord your God, you will revere your parents. And he backs this up very strongly. Let's see how importantly God considers this principle. Exodus 21. Exodus chapter 21, beginning in verse 15. And he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He who, skipping verse 16, verse 17, he who curses, and the Hebrew here doesn't mean just calling a bad name, it says to treat with contempt. His father or his mother shall surely be put to death. I think he backs up this principle pretty strongly. God is saying this is so important that if people do the opposite, they should be put to death. He didn't say that about stealing. There were many societies throughout history that used to kill people for stealing. He didn't say it about telling a lie. He didn't say it about coveting your neighbor's possessions. But he says it about honoring your father and mother. The fact is that our proper understanding of our place in the world, everything about our view of the world starts in the family. Our ability to properly deal with God and with our fellow man starts with our relationship with our parents. Now, one of my favorite bumper stickers is, "We're all dysfunctional, get over it." And it brings up a principle. People try to use that as an excuse. All of us came from various kinds of quote-unquote dysfunctional families. Because not all of us, it's the sad thing is, babies are raised by young people who are still learning about life. It's the rare young person who really thinks about what he's trying to achieve in rearing children. There's so many things I didn't think about that it's difficult for me to speak on a child-rearing kind of a topic, because I just felt like I not only missed the boat, I didn't even know the bay was out there that the boat was in so many different areas. And the amazing thing about life is that once you begin to figure out a few things, you're 50 years old. And your kids, rather than being the end result of your having learned how to do it, were part of the process of your learning how to do it. Because our relationship with God and mankind starts with our relationship with our parents, this is why parents bear an incredibly heavy responsibility in rearing our children. We should put a lot of effort into thinking about how we're going to do it and what we're seeking to achieve. Mr. Meredith put it very well in the old Ten Commandments booklet where he said, the relationship of children to their parents is an exact type of the spiritual relationship between true Christians and God. Guess who plays God's role, brethren? We do. We are gods, in effect, to our children. That's the role we start out with. The lessons of character learned in that relationship last children for the rest of their lives and in many ways influence their eternity. In the eyes of a small child, a parent stands in the place of God Himself. For the loving and affectionate parent is the child's provider, protector, teacher, and lawgiver. A child's early training in response to this relationship will in large measure determine his later response to the larger relationships with society. And ultimately it is certain to affect his relationship with his spiritual Father in heaven. This is so true, brethren, that people that have the greatest difficulty building the right kind of relationship with God, it can still be done, but who have the greatest difficulty are generally women who were sexually abused by their parents. And I've dealt with some. Because there's no more of a violation of trust than that. It tears your heart out to hear some of these stories, but brethren, it's not uncommon. Not as uncommon. I'm not going to say it's common, it's not common. But it's not as uncommon as it should be. A woman who was abused as a child sexually has very great difficulty thinking of a loving Father in heaven. Our Father in heaven is unquestionably a male role. It's portrayed as. And how can a woman have a positive impression of a male role when her first male role violated trust to that great of a degree? It's very, very difficult. Every society that's ever been in history was built on the family unit. It's the most basic, fundamental, and the most important unit of any society. Whether it's an extended family, a village, a town, a county, even an ethnic group and culture, or an entire nation. That's why Satan has worked so hard to attack the family in our society. And boy, what a mess we are in. Our society is in worse shape than any of us realize because it's happened gradually. In so many ways, again, I've said it before, we don't have to be in the church to realize that this society is going to collapse. And that will be primarily due to the destruction of the family unit. Now you understand why the issue of gay marriage, quote unquote, if we're at the point of talking about it, we're in worse shape than any of us realize. The issue itself isn't really that important in the overall context of things. We shouldn't even be discussing it. The fact that we are shows you where our society is. And we lack, in our society, almost completely, a historical perspective. The exact same thing, in one form or another, happened with the Roman Empire. Gibbon's book has been out there for how many hundreds of years? The lessons are there. But like the ancient kings of Israel, who had the written record of their own history, every time they sought God's help, it worked out. Every time they didn't, it didn't. Did they learn from their history? No. And we aren't learning from ours. Children that are raised in a godly family and taught proper honor and respect for their parents have a foundation to know how to relate to everything else in life. This doesn't just deal with how to relate one-on-one with people. It deals with even being able to take the curveballs that life throws at you. A spoiled child doesn't like to be told no, does it? Well, a spoiled adult, first time they run into unfairness on the job, they're like, earth-shattering. This is the worst thing on earth. How can they possibly ever do this to me? And, this is why And it's been a mutual thing, by the way. Companies deserve what they get. But how much corporate loyalty is there anymore, or loyalty to corporations? Oftentimes there's more on the employee side than there is on the corporate side, but believe me, it's pretty much gone on the employee side too. And, the idea is, the moment I encounter unfairness, I'm out of here. There's no stick-to-itiveness. There's no feeling of life is unfair, get over it. But if we're taught proper biblical respect of our parents, honoring of our parents, the family structure, we will know how to relate to authority throughout life. They'll be able to understand even the concept of Philippians 2 verse 3, esteeming others better than ourselves, which is a fundamental approach to life. A person raised in a healthy family will be able to do that better than somebody raised in an unhealthy family. Absolutely no question about it. And the interesting thing is, this doesn't have to be done perfectly to yield good fruits. There's enough gray hairs here who remember what the 40s and the 50s were like. And how do we treat that in our society? What was that movie a couple of years back that had, Pleasantville was it? Had started out, on the 40s and 50s, the society? And tried to portray the 40s and 50s as if it was something to be mocked. Well, the truth be known, how much better off was our society in the 40s and the 50s than it is now? Again, most of us here, a good number of us here, can remember those days. There was respect for the parents. Leave it to Beaver. Father knows best. Boy, try to get away with that. The only way you'd get, or my three sons, yes, very much so. What that portrays, if you have a chance, if you have cable, try to find some of those shows. It will blow you away at how much you have changed since you watched those shows 20, 30 years ago. Even though, was our society perfect then? No. Was our family perfect then? Absolutely not. Those are the days, if you'll recall, when the church was too authoritarian. But despite those faults, the church and the society was actually, in the family unit, healthier then, in most cases. There was a survey once that contrasted the problems that exist in our society today, or our schools today, and compared that with the problems that existed in the 1950s. One of the biggest problems in the 1950s in the schools was chewing gum in class. I mean, that should blow us away. You know what the number one problem, chewing on crystal meth or whatever it is. That's the kind of contrast. I gladly take a problem with dealing with kids chewing in class as being the number one problem in schools. The fruits show that we're clearly infinitely better off then than we are now in terms of the family. And with that entire thing has gone, I've joked about this before, but the automatic respect of parents, which was largely there in the 40s and 50s, is almost totally gone. Now, in a sense, the only upside to that I can see is that if you earn respect from your kids, it's a different kind of respect. But by and large, that's death for a societal unit. We need to recapture true values, to create in our children not only an automatic respect for the father and mother, but then being able to work out from that toward every other adult that they encounter, toward their first boss, toward the government. Notice how God addresses this in Ephesians 6. And we've read this scripture many a time, but I don't know that we've read it from this point of view. It's better if you take the tea bag out, otherwise I'm chewing on the tea bag all the time. Ephesians 6. We'll read the context of this a little bit more later, but I just want to cite this one scripture for now. Children, Ephesians 6, verse 1, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Now he's quoting Exodus 20 here. Have you ever wondered why this promise is tied to this commandment? Why would it be well with us and we would live long on the earth if we honor our father and our mother? Well, first of all, our concept of God is formed largely, initially, by our relationship with our parents. Now, this doesn't mean you can't have a good relationship with God even if you had a lousy relationship with your parents. All I'm saying is, it gives you more that you have to overcome and re-educate yourself on. We simply will have to choose to approach things God's way rather than have a more of an inclination to do things God's way because we were properly reared in a relationship to authority. Now, this essentially applies to all of us nowadays. One way or another, our families miss the mark in these areas, largely because, you as a family, I don't care how hard you try, you cannot live as an island in this society unless you take up fishing on the Kamchatka Peninsula somewhere or in the Aleutians or whatever. But even then, I'd be willing to bet it'd be very, very difficult. Your interaction with society makes it very difficult to have a balanced and a normal family. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's just difficult. If our parenting examples were bad, as they generally were in one way or another, we still have a choice in how we choose to approach authority. We still have a choice in understanding what God says and doing it His way rather than that way which comes naturally to us. And so we have a choice how we approach authority in the family, in the church, or in society, or on the job. And ultimately, how we choose to approach authority with God Himself. Our attitude toward authority is built on our attitudes toward our parents growing up, and now upon our attitudes toward God in addition. As we've matured, that responsibility of how we approach God transfers more over to us. Now, many will hide behind, and it's very popular today, and that's the reason I mentioned this New Testament evangelism things. We don't live in a vacuum in the living church of God either. We're continually influenced by the heresies and near heresies and developing heresies of our own church community. And in this independent-minded, Laodicean, let the people decide era, many will hide behind the delusion that they're submitted to God, so I don't need any man involved in the relationship at all. Now, that'd be fine if that's the way God set things up to work, but it's not. God set up a structure and He expects us to work with, honor, and respect that structure. So people taking this independent approach show by the fruits of their own approach and relationships with the various authorities in their lives that it's not true. You can't just have a me and you God relationship. A proper relationship is founded on two legs, which is true in ancient Israel, true today. The church and your personal relationship with God. It's not either or, it's both. Just as it was in ancient Israel, the temple and the priesthood, and you still had your personal relationship with God. God heard the prayers of the individual Israelite too. You can see that as you read the Old Testament accounts. And they understood that. They understood that the one did not replace the other, that both worked together. In point of fact, too many in our society and in our general Church of God community are only submitted to God as they choose. And so who's the real God? They make an idol out of themselves. They only submit to or respect authority when they agree with it. In such a situation, the only authority they're really submitting to is themselves, and they've made an idol out of themselves. Now let's read the context of Ephesians 6 and see how the overall context of authority in the family and beyond is portrayed. Beginning in verse 1 again. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. We're yet to address that fully, but I'm going to. Why will you live long on the earth? Why will it be well with you and live long on the earth? And you, fathers, in God's role, in God's place with your parents, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. How do we provoke our children to wrath? Over application of authority. Applying authority in the wrong way. Children, especially teenagers, are acutely sensitive to the concept of fairness. And if their parents are chronically unfair, they can deal with the fact that all of us are human and we're always going to be unfair at one time or another. But if we're chronically unfair in how we apply our authority within our family, we will provoke our children to resentment and wrath. Instead, we're not to do it that way. Paul says we are to bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. There's an inherently different approach involved in training. We're not talking about electroshock therapy training or Pavlovian training, where the kid's supposed to get up at 7 o'clock to go to school, and so you rig his bed up to an electric grid, and, that's not training. That's a wrong application of authority. But bring them up in the training and admonition, not your training and admonition, but the training and admonition of the Lord. Realizing who you're going to answer to for how you do it. And if we're acutely aware with a fear of God who we're going to answer to for the job we do, we're going to be gentle. We're going to be loving. Bondservants, now he goes on, talking about the relationship of authority in our life. Workers, I could say, employees. Be obedient to those who are your bosses, according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart, as to Christ. That's kind of a mind-blowing concept. Do we approach our employers as if they were in the they're in the place of Christ, in effect, in a way. Now, Paul is not saying, if your boss imposes upon you or tries to pressure you to come over and mow his grass every Sunday unpaid, if it were Christ, I'd go over and mow his grass. But that's not what he's saying. He's saying approach them with a purity of attitude and approach. Understanding authority. They have a valid, within their area of control, within their purview, they have a valid authority over us. And so rather than being men pleasers, as he talks about here a little bit later, with fear and trembling and sincerity of heart as to Christ, we are to approach our employers in a sincerity of heart as with Christ, as to Christ, not with eye service as men pleasers. Have we ever seen that? The guy who's working hard until the boss turns around and he's leaning on the shovel thereafter. Or the guy who, whenever the boss isn't around, spends most of his time down at the water cooler or the coffee pot. Doing the will of God, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. I've had quite a few jobs in my life where my boss could not keep track of me day to day, minute to minute. In fact, most of my jobs, thank you, Lord, have been that way. That I haven't had somebody sitting on my shoulder. And I've had to try to learn to work just as hard as if he was sitting on my shoulder. Because of this principle. Because Jesus Christ is always aware of what we're doing. So if I guess Bernie brings up the thought of driving truck. And I could fool around, although generally you're under a real time crunch, so you don't get a chance to do this. But let's say you're on a job that you could fritter away your time. You're a police officer, and you could, if you wanted to, go and spend most of your time at the donut shop or whatever. We should be motivated by the fact that Jesus Christ is always watching us, and He's our overall boss. And we should work as though we're working directly for Jesus Christ. We take that approach with our employers, you're going to stand out as an employee. Because that's not the general approach of our society today, is it? Not with eye service as men pleasers. That's the general approach of our society today to the authority in their lives, in work. But as bondservants, as employees of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. He just gave us how we're supposed to approach our employment opportunities. Has nothing to do with the righteousness of our boss. It has to do with our righteousness. A child who is reared in a proper family to honor his parents will do this innately. With good will doing service as to the Lord, he repeats himself, and not to men. Your boss ultimately is Jesus Christ in every aspect of your life. Knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he's an employee or self-employed. I know I'm paraphrasing this to make this more adaptable to the lives that we live today. And you, employers, if you happen to be in that position, do the same thing to them. Serve them. Don't rule them with a rod of iron. I don't know if Christ meant that the way we take it, but don't rule them with a stick in your hand ready to pound them, because after all, Christ says with the measure we deal, it'll be dealt back to us. You employers do the same thing to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. I don't care if you're Donald Trump and you got 10,000 people working for you. Point is, God is going to hold you accountable for how you treat them. So there's a lot in here on authority, isn't there? On relationships to authority. Notice what we've taught here. Husbands must strive to be worthy of honor. They are to exercise their authority in love and service as Christ does, and as they would like Him to treat them. Is that a heavy enough job for us husbands? I think so. Number 2. Wives must give honor and respect and submission to their husbands, even if they're not worthy of it. You know what the world would say? If you could persuade them that the woman is supposed to submit to the husband, the world would say, okay, but I'll do it only if I agree with it. And as I said at the feast, that's not submission. That's still serving the God of ourselves, because we're the authority we listen to. Women today, and the church has been affected far too much by the world, have bought into the lie that they're not obligated to respect or honor their husband unless they agree with him. And that's wrong. That is a recipe for chaos, disaster, and family problems. No less than a husband still needs to submit and work as Christ just described in Ephesians 6 with his employer. How many of us have ever had terrific, wonderful employers, bosses? Okay? Has that been the majority of your experience or the exception? The exception. All right. I would say the same thing. Far and away the exception. I've had a couple of good bosses. But does the kind of boss you have dictate the kind of Christian you're supposed to be in relation to them? Do you treat one way and another the other way? No. Our approach should be the same in both cases. Women, that's true of you too. And if you don't do this in your families, you are sowing absolute chaos and the seeds of the destruction of your own family in your family. Now, I'm not saying this is fair. It isn't fair. Men, we should do a better job than we're doing. But ladies, you should do a better job than you're doing too. Because the state of the family, and believe me when I say this, I don't know if any of you have done it as imperfectly as I have. I had the best of intentions. But the road to somewhere is supposed to be paved with good intentions. And looking back on it, I'm ashamed in many ways of the job that I did. Not that, by the way, I'm not putting my family down. My family's turned out very well in spite of me. But this lie that I only have to submit to my boss or to the minister as far as I agree with him, or I only have to submit to my husband as I agree with him, could not be more damaging to the family and to the church and even to our society, because it's certainly the general rule out there, isn't it? The very success of the marital relationship, including specifically the parenting function, depends upon the husband leading in love, even if the wife doesn't respect him, doesn't react as she should. By the way, let's turn the tables here and stress that. You and I, gentlemen, are to lead our families as Christ would lead them, even if they're in total rebellion to us. And the wife is to respect and honor and submit to her husband's office as the head of the household, even if he doesn't do his job properly. That will engender a good deal of occasions of the reality of suffering for righteousness' sake. Christ didn't put that in the Bible as an exercise. It's part and parcel of the Christian life. It should be. The onus is on us to do it right, as God tells us to do it, even if our spouses don't. Now, the ideal is we're both working together toward a common goal and we both do it right. That's an extremely powerful and potent combination. But the fact that our spouse doesn't do their job right, or we feel they don't, in no way changes our obligation and challenge to do our job right. The benefit of obedience. Who benefits from doing things God's way? Who's the one who benefits the most? We do. That's why the onus is on us. And that's why 1,000,000 years from now, where we'll be and what we'll be doing will derive from what we chose to do now. Children must be taught to honor and respect their parents first, and then all other adults and all other authority in their lives. It's in the family that we learn our basic approach to life, to authority, and to the matter of instruction. You know, you can read the entire book of Proverbs and it'll talk about this. People who do it God's way as opposed to people who do it Satan's way. That's what the book of Proverbs is about, to contrast the two and the fruits that result from it. Proverbs, here's just a couple examples. Proverbs 5, verse 22. Proverbs 5, verse 22. His own iniquities entrap the wicked man, and he's caught in the cords of his sin. He shall die for lack of instruction, and in the greatness of his folly, he shall go astray. People that are not reared properly refuse instruction. That's what the book of Proverbs talks about. And their iniquities, their choices, how they react to various and sundry authorities in their life, will determine their trials and the penalties that they'll engender. And that's why children who are in rebellion to their parents will be fighting every other authority in their lives too, and they will make themselves and others miserable. And God helped them to learn the basic lesson that how we relate to authority determines the fruits in our lives in many ways, and the trials we have in many ways. If we do this successfully, if we really strive to be somebody who is taught and teachable because we know how to approach the subject of authority in our lives, and to the degree that we're successful in doing this, it will lead to an overall less stressful, less conflict-filled life. Remember how often I mentioned that Satan oftentimes takes a look at each of us in the church, and in many cases he sees that we're so busy shooting ourselves in the foot, he doesn't have to, okay, I can leave them to work up, they're causing enough of their own problems. I really think that's true. And a lot of it comes because we don't know how to relate to the various authorities in our lives. And we cause stress to ourselves. And you say, in what way does this work? You come along with me on a visit to an ex-con who's dealing with onerous parole issues, who had to deal with being in prison and being powerless to stop abuse of sexual and other varieties. This comes from somebody not knowing how to approach authority, approaching authority wrongly, and reaping the results of it. Now, it doesn't always have to result in going to prison. But how many of us have known people, little scriptures like Proverbs 13 verse 10, only by pride comes contention. A prideful attitude is a sign of an improper rearing in part. And a prideful attitude will cause contention and stress and problems and arguments and fights and lawsuits and everything else throughout a person's life. Because of these kinds of problems, I don't know if any of you have known somebody who just bounces from one disaster to another disaster because of their self-will. They die earlier than people who live a more serene life. We're beginning to get at why God said that your days may be long on the earth that the Lord your God shall give you. Not only is it the fact that we cause a lot of our problems, but how we react to how life happens. Like, for instance, a child, as I mentioned, that was spoiled and their parents bent over backwards to accommodate them the way people do in the world today. The first time they encounter unfairness in life, man, they have nothing like an adult's temper tantrum. They can't believe that anybody would dare to be unfair to them. They never experienced it in their life before. Now, in a healthy family, especially for those of you who had more than one kid, you get a lot of this, and you say, tough, life's unfair, get over it, kid. Do what I tell you to do anyway. And you begin to learn that life is not supposed to be fair. And it never will be, so get used to it. So imagine the stress of somebody who grew up thinking that the world owed them fairness. I've seen people like that. Well, brethren, we've got elements of that in ourselves. That causes stress, and an improper handling of stress is largely what shortens our lives. That your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Again, reading from Mr. Meredith's Ten Commandments booklet, obedience to the fifth commandment automatically results in the building of habits and character which tend to long life. A young person so trained will avoid the recklessness, the violence, and the wrong companionships and rebellion against authority, which often result in an untimely death. Micah 7. Micah chapter 7. Now here God is in the midst of a prophecy describing the decay of end-time civilization which brings the wrath of God on it. By the way, there's a number of you here who have never had your own family. Does this all not apply to somebody in that situation? No, it all applies. The principles all apply. Micah 7, verse 2. Now here, Micah is describing a prophecy on the decay of end-time civilization and the result that it's going to bring God's wrath down on our society. It's called the Great Tribulation, the Day of the Lord. Verse 2, The faithful man has perished from the earth, and there is no one upright among men. They all lie in wait for blood. Every man hunts his brother with a net, that they may successfully do evil with both hands. That sounds like some of the descriptions we read about in the book of Isaiah, doesn't it? People who run after evil, who call evil good and good evil, call black white and white black. This is our society. And by the way, I've mentioned this before, but brethren, don't think that the Enron case was an exception. The Enron case is the rule in American business because we have an entire generation of sociopaths, if I can put it that way, amoral people who do not believe in moral absolutes, coming in and becoming executives. God help you never to work for one of them. You cannot successfully run a business this way. If our society becomes one giant kleptocracy, which means I get mine. I know this company's going to collapse here pretty soon, but I'm going to get mine before it does. There are banana republics that run that way, and they don't run very well. Take Zimbabwe as an example. You don't want to live in Zimbabwe. It is one giant kleptocracy, from Mugabe all the way down. Everybody knows it's going to come to an end and collapse, and somebody's going to rise up, and everybody wants to get their own. Zimbabwe is us in a few years. The glue that holds society together is a commonly held moral foundation. We no longer have that. So our collapse is assured even if the Great Tribulation didn't happen. That they may successfully do evil with both hands. The prince asks for gifts, bribery. The judge seeks a bribe, and the great man utters his evil desire, so they scheme together. Boy, you couldn't describe our society any better than that. The best of them is like a briar. The most upright is sharper than a thorn hedge. The day of your watchman and your punishment comes. Now shall be their perplexity. Do not trust in a friend because you can't. Do not put your confidence in a companion. Guard the doors of your mouth from her who lies in your bosom, your very wife. For son dishonors father. Daughter rises against her mother, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own household. Chaos. This is where our society is at. Remember what God said in 1 Samuel 15, verse 23, dealing when Samuel was dealing with Saul over his rebellion. 1 Samuel 15, verse 23, for rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. He's talking about an approach to constituted authority, whether in the family or in the society or in our relationship to God. In this case, he was talking about Saul's relationship with God specifically, which was flawed fundamentally. That's why he was rejected. But brethren, the principles he's bringing out here are still applicable to every one of us. The rebellious, self-willed attitude and stubbornness resisting authority and instruction that is validly established in our lives is as iniquity and idolatry. Idolatry and witchcraft are two of the worst sins in the Bible. That's where God puts that kind of attitude. Proverbs 17, verse 11. Proverbs 17, verse 11. An evil man seeks only rebellion. Therefore, a cruel messenger will be sent against him. There's no upside to self-will, brethren. Even though it is worshipped in our society today, there's no upside to it. You don't even get freedom by it. You get slavery by it. Because the universe is not designed by the Creator who designed it to reward self-will. God doesn't have to come down here and specifically curse you. The same as God, when you jump off a cliff, God doesn't have to be the one who pushes you down. It happens naturally because that's the way the universe is designed to operate. Rebellion and stubbornness and self-will brings automatic penalties that result in a shorter life, in more trials, in great heartache, that result in you not living long on the earth, in the land that God has given you to dwell in. Proverbs 29. Proverbs 29, verse 22. An angry man stirs up strife. A person who does not control their emotions, does not exert spiritual maturity, emotional maturity. An angry man stirs up strife. He'll do that in his family too. If we respond to our children primarily in anger, we will stir up in them strife and resentment and problems. And a furious man abounds in transgression. They go hand in hand. Hosea 4. Services started at 2, right? I get confused between here and Phoenix and Tucson and everything else. By the way, I'm not going to primarily go into 1 Corinthians 7, where it talks about our relationship with governmental authority as well, but it's directly tied into this entire process. Our relationship with all authority starts with our relationship in the family. Hosea 4, verse 16. For Israel is stubborn like a stubborn calf. Now the Lord will let them forage like a lamb in open country. What happens to a lamb who's out foraging on its own in open country? It's called fast food for the wolves and coyotes. Okay? So God says, I'm not going to protect you anymore. You want to be stubborn, that's fine, that's your choice. But here's what's going to result. Israel is stubborn like a stubborn calf. Now the Lord will let them forage like a lamb in open country. Ephraim is joined to idols. Let him alone. Their drink is rebellion. They commit harlotry continually. Her rulers dearly love dishonor. And the Hebrew word means bribes. Payoffs. I don't know how many of you have been following the UN Oil for Food program. We're not alone in this corruption. That was one big bribery feed fest. Everybody knew it was going to come out, and it's basically grab and hide as fast as you can. The Western world has been the cultural leader of the world ever since the ascendancy of Britain. And this is what we've led the rest of the world in and influenced them in. We've taught them our ways of kleptocracy. What we failed to do was teach them any kind of righteousness, because we were basically throwing our righteousness out the window ourselves. The process of liberalization that's happening in modern so-called Christianity, they're abandoning whatever tie to the Bible they ever had, which in many cases wasn't much. But it's funny that they have any credibility for doing that. The Methodists, they've lost half their membership in the past 50 years. So their solution is keep doing what we've been doing, only do it more. Oh, boy, that's intelligent. Again, God's Spirit is the spirit of a sound mind, and they're the opposite. 2 + 2 = 5 with these people. Now, I mentioned earlier, this is the ideal. We've been talking about the ideal. Every young person should think about, educate, and teach themselves, should be reading books, trying to figure out how they're going to approach the subject of being married and having a family. Unquestionably. I didn't do it anywhere near enough when I was growing up and going through it. But what if your family is grown? Or what if you never have had a family of your own? How does this apply to you? What if your family's grown and you made about every mistake there is to make in the book and then about 25 more? Does that mean that, we have no hope and this is the commandment has no meaning for us? We can just skip this one and read just the 9? No. The 5th commandment, as I've stressed many times over, has at its heart our approach to authority. And we can improve our understanding and our attitude and our approach in that area throughout our lives. And unfortunately, in this Laodicean era, this is one of the biggest problems that people in the church deal with, is approaching authority. Now, yes, I have a responsibility as a minister, because in effect, I'm in an office ordained by Christ. Believe me, the only thing that enables me to do this job is God and God's Holy Spirit. But your attitude toward authority in the church and in your family, or just as in your family, does not depend upon me. If I were the biggest ogre the church has ever seen, and that would be something because we've had our share, haven't we? That would in no way alter your responsibility to approach the authority in the church in the proper attitude. We need to recapture God's approach to the subject of authority. Hebrews 12. Just as a wife is not excused from submitting to her husband because he doesn't do it perfectly. Hebrews 12, or a child, for that matter, or the husband himself in other ways. God says in Hebrews 12, verse 7, if you endure chastening, God deals with you as sons. If you are not self-willed, if you are submissive to the authorities that God has established in your life, then God deals with you as sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Do we want to be illegitimate, or do we want to be sons of God? Or daughters. But there won't be daughters, female in the kingdom, so we say sons of God. Well, obviously, we're not doing this for an exercise. We're doing this because we want to be in the first resurrection. So God says, don't be self-willed. Accept instruction, accept direction, accept correction. Even if it's unfair. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us and we paid them respect. Now that's less true now than it was then. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For indeed, they indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but He for our profit, that we may be partakers of His holiness. Now, no chastening seems joyful for the present, but painful, of course. That's the whole idea. Chastening is not fun. But He's not saying that we're to become sadomasochists or whatever. We're not supposed to enjoy the pain of trials. I've always wondered about the stability of people who, rejoice in their trial. I think that means that I have to hop up and down as I develop terminal cancer or something. I mean, there aren't many that do. But no chastening seems joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Ultimately, who is the father and mother that we are to respect and honor and revere and submit to and obey? The physical father and mother are just temporary. We're given an eternal father and mother. The church is said to be the mother of us all in that sense, and God the Father is our Father. It's said that the church will be the bride of Christ. It continues to use a male-female, mother-father analogy throughout, it will be eternity. We are being chastened and trained. And the parable of the talents, over the number of rewards that we receive are going to be tied to how well we respond to the training we're given. Brethren, you and I are being reared by God. We are the children of God. There is a rearing, a training, a chastening process going on. Our attitude toward authority determines how we progress in that. If we are self-willed, if we are stubborn, if we resist training and instruction, we won't make anywhere near the progress that we could. And if we're too much that way, we won't be there at all. 2 Peter 2. 2 Peter 2, verse 9. The Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of trials and reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment. And especially those who walk according to the flesh in the lust of uncleanness and despise authority. You can read the book of Jude. It echoes much of this. They are presumptuous, self-willed. Now here in the course of one verse, we've got despised authority, presumptuous, self-willed. They are not afraid to speak evil of dignitaries, of authorities in their lives. He doesn't specify what dignitaries, does he? It's kind of a general term. Whereas angels, who are greater in power and might than any of us, do not bring a reviling accusation against them before the Lord. But these, like natural brute beasts, made to be caught and destroyed, speak evil of things they do not understand, and will utterly perish in their own corruption, and will receive the wages of unrighteousness. Brethren, he's describing our self-willed Laodicean world that you and I are living in, that you and I swim in and are affected by more than we realize. We have to be vigilant to choose a different approach to life. Now, what about... Well, I guess I'll get to that. Notice what Christ did, by the way, just to show you that it doesn't stop with adulthood. I think this is... I was reading a reference book and came across this, and I thought it was a really good point. Let's turn to John 19. Most of us have a tendency to approach our parents negatively. In other words, we're acutely aware of the mistakes our parents made, and that's not a valid approach. We should approach them for the successes they did. Even a bad parent obviously fed you and clothed you enough that you're here. So that's a starting point. That's something. Notice how Christ approached his mother. John 19, verse 25. Now this man was dying one of the most horrible, torturous deaths ever devised by mankind. And one of the things he did before he died was make sure his mother was taken care of. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas and Mary Magdalene. And when Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing by, that's John talking about himself, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." And he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her to his own home. Jesus was the head of his household at that time. It was his responsibility to take care of his mother. Now, he had a few other things on his mind right about then. He still fulfilled his responsibility to his mother. And so often we get so self-centered upon our needs and what we're struggling with. I think Christ set us a pretty wonderful example. Now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, what if you had a truly bad parent? Those upbringings exist. A father who was abusive, or even sexually abusive. Now, obviously, you cannot respect and honor a parent like that the same way you can a good parent, and God doesn't expect you to. But forgiveness, esteeming others better than yourselves, not hating them but forgiving them, not holding the grudge against them, treat them with the same basic respect we are to treat everyone as a potential son of God. Doesn't mean you have any obligation to fellowship with them. Doesn't mean you have any obligation to invite them over for Father's Day. None of that. There's a certain amount of the respect and honor that we are expected to give a parent that's earned. There's a basic respect that we're to give everyone, and maybe an extra measure in the way we talk about them. We still honor their office, even though they were completely dishonorable. But there's no obligation to spend a lot of time with them, to try to build a relationship with them. The higher respect, esteem, and reverence of the parental offices are primarily earned. You can't wish them into existence. So the attitude we approach our parents with, even if they were the worst parents on earth, you honor them by forgiving them. You know who their judge is going to be. And most of us didn't have, an axe murderer for a parent. So it wasn't that bad. Most of our parents were a mixture of good and bad. And if you had one that was more heavily on the bad side, you can't honor them the same way you would an honorable, righteous, and upstanding, loving parent. And God doesn't expect you to. But there is a basic honor and respect we have a responsibility to give. A proper and diligent observance of the fifth commandment is incumbent upon all Christians and vital in many ways. Some of those ways are, it's vital to observe the fifth commandment to learn how to approach authority in our lives, how to relate to authority. Number two, it's vital for knowing and accepting our place in life without envy, without resentment, without a feeling of life is unfair and I'm owed fairness in my life. It's vital for the building of extended families. Because even though there are very few extended families left out there, this is one of the ways I envy the Latino community, because I was at the hospital for Dave Brill when he was going through his operation, and this grandmother was in for her operation. And the waiting room was just packed with people. And they came in and they said her name, for an update, and the entire place cleared out. It was all an extended Latino family there for their grandmother. And it was just margin me left, and I thought, wow. I mean, they're dysfunctional. They're people who children out of wedlock. I mean, they still have problems like all our society has. But that extended family still exists in the Latino community, and I really respect that. What should our goals be, by the way? Young people getting married. By the way, congratulations. I didn't get a chance to say that last week. Our goal should be to try to build that kind of an extended family ourselves. Even if we don't have it ourselves, we should strive to build that. That's what God always intended. That we don't raise our children in a vacuum. We raise it within the context of them in the context of an extended family. Which, by the way, each one of you is. It's easy to look back after we've reared our kids, and we're 50 years from having to deal with those issues in a far different world, to be hypercritical of those who aren't doing it the way we did it today. How much more helpful would it be to support those parents? To lovingly encourage those parents, to pray for those parents, to try and help if they need help. We're an extended family, brethren. That's what God intends us to be. Now, keeping the fifth commandment is also vital for our very frame of mind, for happiness, for contentment, for less stress, for less conflict in our life that results in a good, long life by the way God designed the universe to operate. Like gravity, if we observe this commandment diligently, we will reap many rewards, including a longer, happier, more productive life. So I hope you've gained an appreciation for a broader application of the fifth commandment in each of our lives.